Hey guys, tonight we will hear a dramatic story, the horrific, intimate practices of Rome's most perverted empress. This isn't your usual tale of emperors and empresses draped in velvet and marble. No, this is a slow descent into the candle-lit shadows of ancient Rome, into the private chambers where history's darkest whispers echo the loudest. Tonight, you'll walk the palace halls with her, a woman history dared not name too loudly, and feel the chill of secrets that still rattle through time. You will never imagine that this terrible thing could happen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the rough stone under your bare feet as you step out into a corridor of the Palatine Hill. The air is heavy with incense and jasmine. Somewhere someone is being strangled with silk quietly. That's just how things are here. The palace is alive, but not in a way you'd want. It watches, it listens, it remembers. Her name drips from lips like a drop of poison into sweet wine, Empress Valeria Messalina. You've heard of her, haven't you? The young, seductive wife of Emperor Claudius, who by the time she was 20, had already left behind a trail of broken men, blackmail plots, and sexual rumors so vile that even Rome's poets blushed to describe them. They said she was beautiful. They said she was monstrous. They said she was both. But you didn't come here for rumors. You came for the truth. So now, as you pass through the hanging red drapes of her inner chamber, you brace yourself. Because what happened here wasn't just scandal, it was ritual. And it wasn't about love. It was about control. She wasn't born evil. That's what makes it worse. You imagine her at 14, married off not out of love but convenience to a man old enough to be her grandfather. The emperor was wise, yes, but dull, partially deaf, physically weak. A scholar, not a lover. Not a fighter, and she a coiled serpent with flowers in her hair. She quickly learned that her true empire wasn't out there in the forum, but in here behind velvet doors where no law applied. She created a new court, one not ruled by laws or senates, but by seduction, humiliation, and submission. Her bedroom wasn't just a place of pleasure. It was a theater of power. There were rumors that she built an underground brothel within the palace. Not for profit, but for sport, for domination, for collecting the names of every senator, general, and aristocrat who would trade their dignity for a night with her. She kept score. Literally. Some said she pinned tally marks beside their names, how long they lasted, what they begged for, what they gave up afterward to stay silent. She made the powerful crawl. And you're just watching now, not participating. Not yet. The room you've entered is dim and humid. A copper basin filled with rose petals glows under torchlight. There's no bed, just furs and cushions and chains, discreetly sewn into the walls. The smell is not of perfume, but musk, wine, and sweat. One servant slips away the moment you enter, eyes downcast, neck bruised. She's not dismissed. She's discarded. And then she enters. Not like royalty. Not like a wife. Like a predator. Her voice is soft, but her eyes strip your soul bare. She doesn't yell. She whispers. And when she whispers, people betray countries. It is said she once challenged the high priestess of Venus herself to a sexual contest. 50 men, one night. Winner takes the temple. The priestess gave up after 25. Messalina didn't stop. She wanted the record, and the gods watched in stunned silence. Was it true, or just another tale spun by frightened men? You can't tell anymore, because she doesn't just blur the line between myth and memory, she obliterates it. One noblewoman tried to confront her, calling her an embarrassment to the empire. The next morning, the woman's husband was found naked, bound, and gibbering in the Senate chamber. He never spoke again. Messalina simply smiled and said, "Men are so fragile." At night, she didn't sleep. She prowled, in disguise, wearing the robes of a low-class prostitute, slipping out into the Subura district, while the emperor snored in ignorance. She wasn't slumming it. She was hunting. She needed to be wanted, not out of duty, but lust. Desperate, primal, filthy lust. There was a name she gave herself in the dark streets, she-wolf of the Palatine. She didn't want loyalty. She wanted obsession. And when she had it, she crushed it. You realize now that her power wasn't in her body. It was in what she could make others do with theirs. How far would you go for her smile? How much would you confess just to be near her? She kept a scroll beneath her pillow, written in her own hand. A list. Names. Dates. Weaknesses. The secrets of Rome's elite. Not because she feared them, because she owned them. Her bedroom was a vault of blackmail and broken souls. You step back. The torchlight flickers. Did you just hear something from the far curtain, a whisper, a laugh? No. It's only your imagination. But still you feel watched. She never needed swords. She conquered men with shame and silk. And in a city that fed on spectacle and cruelty, she gave them both in bed. This is only the beginning. You want to look away, but the curtain lifts and you're pulled deeper. Messalina's world was not Rome's. It was a place beyond consequence where desire wrote the law and cruelty was the enforcement. And in that world, her palace wasn't a home. It was a trap. The cushions beneath your feet have stains no one dares scrub out. The scent in the air, wine, sweat, fear isn't sprayed from a bottle. It's soaked into the walls. You walk slowly now past pillars wrapped in silk. Each one bears a different color, not for beauty, but for signaling. Red meant new, green meant desperate, black meant broken. Somewhere above this chamber, the emperor dreams he's respected, loved, safe. Below him in rooms he doesn't visit, his wife is conducting another kind of senate. She summoned men not with decrees, but with invitations dipped in perfume. And when they arrived, they didn't know if they would leave whole. A general once refused her, a moralist perhaps, or simply afraid. Either way, he never made it home. Slaves found his body floating in the Tiber 3 days later. His lips were sewn shut. A pearl sat on his tongue. Messalina wore his ring for a week, just long enough for people to notice. It wasn't about sex. That's what makes it worse. She wanted submission. Emotional, physical, public. You pass by a low dais covered in ivory carvings. Some are beautiful winged gods lovers, but others show scenes too dark to describe fully. A man crawling on all fours leashed like a dog. A senator forced to kneel before a woman draped in a wolf's hide. The detail is too precise for it to be imagined. Someone saw this. Someone carved what they saw. This was a theater, and Messalina was both director and star. When she hosted her secret evenings, those gatherings the historians never fully confirmed, she made each guest wear a mask, not to hide themselves, to shed themselves. They weren't men of Rome in those rooms. They were animals, vessels, toys. They signed no names, only moaned, cried, obeyed. She called these nights the games, but no one ever won. You hear a servant whisper once, she drinks her wine with blood, and you don't believe it until you see the cup. Ornate gold, but along the rim, a thin line of something dark, not quite red, not quite brown, thick, dried. Was it a warning or a signature? There's a story told in secret, whispered by eunuchs who served the bathhouses, that Messalina once hired an entire troupe of actors to perform a myth, the ravishment of Proserpina, but instead of a stage, she used her bedroom, and instead of actors, she used senators. The scene ended with her on a throne made of flesh, men piled beneath her like a staircase, and she never broke character. Claudius never knew, or pretended not to. You reach the chamber of mirrors. This place, this hidden room, was never meant for rest. It was for reflection. But not the spiritual kind. The walls are entirely polished bronze, distorted just enough to twist the body, to bend it. You see yourself now stretched and split arms too long, eyes too wide. This is how she made them feel. Unrecognizable. She made the greatest men in Rome undress not just their tunics, but their pride. She asked them questions no empress should ask. What is the filthiest thing you've ever begged for? What would you let me take from you if I never told anyone what you are? And they answered. They always answered. But that was the catch. She never promised to stay silent. She kept their answers, recorded them, in scrolls coded with symbols only she understood, hidden in floorboards behind statues inside hollowed-out books. This palace was not just her sanctuary, it was a vault of shame. You find one now. A scroll half unrolled. Names you almost recognize, followed by brief descriptions. Senator L. Huss cried when whipped. Tribune M. So asked to be called Mother. Envoy F. begged to be kept on a leash. You stop reading, not because you're afraid, because you're realizing something. They weren't victims, not all of them. Some came back, again and again. Because Messalina offered something Rome never could, a place without masks, where their worst selves were not punished, but rewarded. This wasn't love. This wasn't power. This was addiction. And she knew it. She wasn't just a seductress. She was a scientist of sin. One night she challenged a gladiator, famous, adored, undefeated. She told him she could break him without ever drawing blood. He laughed. He never spoke again. You imagine her now whispering into his ear, not curses, promises. And when the sun rose, she walked him through the market on a leash. He followed, naked, proud. Some saw, some clapped. Rome was a city that praised excess. But even excess had a line, and Messalina well. She didn't cross it. She obliterated it. She once declared an empress is not a woman. She is a hunger with a crown. And that's what she became. Even the slaves feared her love, because love meant ruin. It meant being chosen, elevated, used, and thrown away. A favorite boy of hers was found hanging in the garden, his hands removed. No note, just a rose in his mouth. Some say he saw too much. Others say he refused to speak her name. You press forward, but the palace doesn't open for you anymore. It swallows you. The further you walk, the more it feels like a maze. But this is no accident. This was built to confuse, to trap, and to keep certain things hidden. You wonder how many people were lost here physically or spiritually. How many gave up their names, their morals, their sanity, just to be hers. And as you touch the cold stone of the next door, you feel it tremble. Not from wind, from memory, because this is where the worst stories live, and you're about to open it. You push the door, and it opens not with a creak, but with a breath like the room itself has been waiting for you. The temperature shifts. It's cooler here, but not comforting. It feels like the kind of cold that settles beneath the skin and lingers long after you've left. If you ever leave. This is her archive, not of scrolls, not of statues, but of souvenirs. The room is round with alcoves carved into the walls. Each one holds an object, but not just any object. These are offerings, trophies, remnants of nights no one talks about in public. A silver buckle from a senator's boot. A torn piece of toga embroidered with gold thread. A braided lock of hair still tied with a velvet ribbon. You step closer to one display. A necklace. Simple. Worn. Childlike. Below it, a plaque etched into the marble reads, "The boy who couldn't lie." No name. No date. Just that. You wonder if anyone outside these walls ever asked what happened to him. In the center of the room sits a large, low table. Upon it, masks. Dozens of them. Made of wood, leather, bone. Each one bears an expression, grotesque, smiles, open mouths, blindfolded eyes. They aren't props. They're evidence. This was the room where she chose her next game, where she selected who would be summoned, what they would wear, how they would be humiliated. But there's something else. You notice the floor. It's not stone. It's metal. Polished bronze like a mirror. But not for beauty, for observation. She liked to watch from above. There are grates carved into the ceiling, disguised among the floral designs. She would stand in silence, cloaked in shadows, and observe her guests before they knew she had arrived. She wanted to see their fear, their anticipation, their shame. Because power to her wasn't about what people saw in her. It was about what she saw in them when they thought no one was looking. A historian once speculated that Messalina invented her own form of punishment, one that wasn't violent, but surgical. She would learn your secret desire, tempt you with it, let you taste it, and then twist it just enough to turn pleasure into shame. One man begged her to play the role of his deceased wife. He left that night in silence, dragging his fingernails along the palace wall until they bled. He was never seen at court again. Another asked to be her equal. She gave him a crown, a throne beside hers, and made him sit naked for 3 nights, while guests spat on him and fed him scraps from the floor. And yet, they kept coming. She didn't just rule them. She rewrote them. You find a scroll tucked beneath a mask shaped like a snarling boar. Its edges are singed, its ink smudged by what might be tears. It's not a list. It's a confession. I was nothing. She made me feel noticed. I told her everything. My shame, my sins, my hunger. I thought it was love. It wasn't. She kept the candle burning just long enough to blind me, and when I reached out, she let me fall. No signature, no title. You set the scroll down gently. Your fingers tremble. From the corner of your eye, a shadow moves. You turn, but nothing's there. Or maybe something was. Watching. It said Messalina could enter a room without being seen. That she had secret paths built between chambers' passageways, known only to her and her most loyal guards, men who were mutilated to ensure their silence, eunuchs who couldn't speak, slaves who couldn't write. And even if they could, who would believe them? She was the Augusta, the Empress. And in Rome, the Empress could do no wrong until she did too much. But we're not there yet. You pass another door. This one painted red with a lock carved to resemble an open mouth. You hesitate. You feel like you shouldn't be here. But the story is calling. Inside, the air is thick, warm, almost wet. The walls are covered in murals, not Roman myths, but twisted versions. Venus seducing Mars, but Mars is weeping. Apollo playing his lyre while blindfolded women dance on chains. Narcissus drowning in his own reflection. These aren't warnings, they're memories. This is where she performed. Messalina would take the stage, sometimes masked, sometimes not, and command an audience of Rome's highest men to play roles. She called them the trials. They were not rehearsed. They were not safe. Each trial tested how far someone would go for her attention. One night she ordered a senator to confess his darkest act aloud in front of the others. When he refused, she kissed him once and whispered a single name. He fell to his knees. He confessed to murder. Another night, a wealthy merchant was made to pretend to be her husband. She mocked him, slapped him, bound him with golden rope. At the end, she asked, "Do you still want to rule me?" He sobbed. "No, mistress." She replied, "Then you're ready to serve Rome." And the crowd applauded. You understand now that Messalina wasn't perverted by accident. She was shaped into this. Or maybe she shaped herself in defiance of everything the empire told her to be. A wife, a vessel, a shadow of her husband. Instead, she became the fire he couldn't control. And behind closed doors, she set the empire ablaze. But fire doesn't burn forever, and the smoke is rising. The deeper you go, the more the silence grows. It isn't peace. It's suffocation. This part of the palace doesn't echo. Sound doesn't bounce here. It disappears. Just like the ones who displeased her. You descend a narrow staircase. It wasn't made for show. There's no gold, no velvet. Just stone walls close enough to scrape your shoulders if you're not careful. The air smells of earth and something else faint but metallic, like rust or blood long dried. This was her underground theater. She called it the nursery. But there were no children here. Only grown men made small. The first room you enter is empty. A single bronze oil lamp flickers above, casting long shadows that tremble like they remember. In the corner, a stool, a collar on a chain, and a mirror full length, slightly cracked, angled just so. If someone were kneeling, they'd see themselves, begging. Messalina never touched most of them down here. She didn't need to. This space was for those whose fear was more powerful than their lust. Those who needed not her body, but her permission to abandon pride. They called it the breaking room. And when she brought men here, she said the same thing each time. You may leave when you remember what you really are. Some men left after hours. Some stayed for days. Some never walked again. There were no witnesses, no paperwork, only rumors. And in Rome, rumors could be more powerful than decrees. One such rumor told of a visiting dignitary from the eastern provinces. He was proud, loud, dismissive of Roman women. A brute with coins, not words. Messalina invited him to dine. She offered him spiced wine, sweet fruits, soft words, and then she offered him the room. No threats, just a smile. He entered, alone. What emerged hours later was not a man. He crawled, whispering to himself in a language no one understood. He returned to his homeland and never spoke of Rome again. Others weren't so lucky. Messalina believed in documentation, not in writing, but in preservation. One of her personal attendants, a Gaulish woman named Sabina, was said to be a sculptor. Not of clay or marble, but wax. She captured expressions: fear, shame, ecstasy, despair. After every performance, she would sculpt the face of the man before he was allowed to leave. The collection, hundreds of wax faces, was kept in a sealed chamber. You're standing before that door now. You hesitate, but it opens anyway. Inside are shelves, rows and rows of them, faces in mid-scream, eyes rolled upward, mouths open, some crying, some laughing, but none at peace. This is the room no one dared to enter unless summoned. It wasn't a trophy room. It was a gallery of submission. You walk slowly, glancing at each mask. Then you stop. One of the wax figures is familiar. You've seen it before. In the Forum, etched on a coin, a senator, still alive, still respected. But here in wax, his expression is one of total surrender. A note beneath it reads, "His honor melted before the candle did." You move on and find a second room, smaller, softer, draped in silk, perfumed, almost gentle. This is the temptation chamber. It was said Messalina tested her guests. If they passed through the nursery and still begged for her, she would grant them a night here. But there was a price. Inside this chamber, no titles were used, no words of power, only pet names, whispered phrases, and childlike vulnerability. She would cradle her guests, feed them fruit by hand, stroke their hair, and then, as they wept in relief, she'd ask, "What would you give up to stay here forever?" The answers varied. Some said their land, their wealth, their children. One man offered the lives of his own slaves. Another offered his wife. And she accepted. That woman was never seen again. You realize something as you stand there, your fingers brushing the edge of the silk cushions. Messalina didn't simply indulge in perversion. She studied it, categorized it, created entire ecosystems of it, rituals designed to extract, expose, and exploit. Rome called her a monster. But monsters are born. She was made, raised in a palace, married off young, surrounded by gods carved in stone and men who treated women like currency. She learned to use the only weapon she had, her body, and then her mind, and then her hunger. She turned shame into currency, desire into leverage, intimacy into warfare. No one was safe, not even her own blood. Her cousin Junia was said to be the only person who saw through her, who dared to confront her. She begged Claudius to see the truth, to open his eyes. Messalina invited her to a dinner. What followed was whispered for decades. Junia arrived and was escorted to a private dining room. The table was set with strange items, ropes, chains, veils. Confused, she waited. Then Messalina entered, naked but for a golden collar. Behind her were 5 men, each masked. Junia never ate, but she was not allowed to leave. The next morning she was seen wandering the streets barefoot, muttering, "The Empress is not a woman. She is a mirror turned inside out." And then she vanished. You want to stop, but the palace won't let you, because the next room is where her story changes, where even Messalina in all her control began to lose grip, because desire is a fire, and even an empress can be burned by her own flame. The fire began with a name, one that didn't belong to her. Gaius Silius, a man whose beauty turned heads in the forum, whose lineage gleamed like polished marble, and whose confidence made even old generals jealous. He wasn't afraid of whispers. He walked through them. And one day, Messalina looked at him and didn't just want him, she wanted to own him, but not in the way she had before. This wasn't about shame, or hunger, or blackmail. This was something far more dangerous. It was attachment. You reach the next chamber. There are no masks here, no chains, no blood-red murals. Only cushions, flowers, and oil lamps. The walls are painted with scenes of spring doves, wheat lovers holding hands. This was her private sanctuary, her true bedroom. No one else entered here, not the senators, not the actors, not the trembling slaves or groveling generals. Only Gaius. He was the only one allowed to touch her without kneeling, the only one who looked at her without fear, and perhaps the only one she ever wanted to love her back. It terrified her. Because for all her power, Messalina had built her empire on submission and control. But love, that was different. Love was unpredictable. Love was equal, and equality was not safe. But she gave in anyway. Their affair wasn't hidden. Not really. She flaunted it in whispers and glances. She gifted him land-wealth jewelry that should have been worn by senators' wives. She laughed too loudly at his jokes. Let her hand linger too long on his chest. Let the palace walls hear moans that didn't belong to Claudius. It wasn't lust. It was rebellion. Rome didn't mind her cruelty. Rome could forgive perversion. But affection, that was her real mistake. Because affection creates alliances, and alliances threaten emperors. She took it one step further. She married him. In secret, while Claudius was away in Ostia, she arranged a private ceremony in the gardens of her villa. A full Roman wedding, with witnesses, vows, a feast. Some say she was drunk on wine and vanity. Others say she genuinely believed she could dethrone her husband and crown her lover in his place. And perhaps she could have, if Rome hadn't noticed. But Rome always notices. You sit now in the garden chamber, the very place where the wedding is said to have occurred. The flowers are long dead, the vines dry and brittle, but the marble altar remains. There are still wine stains on the stone. It's said that during the wedding, Messalina wore nothing but a sheer veil and golden sandals, that she kissed Silius in front of the guests and whispered, "Show you belong to me, in life and in death." And he smiled, because he believed her. You wonder for a moment what it felt like to be him, to be wanted by the most dangerous woman in Rome, not for leverage, but for love. And then you remember how the story ends. When Claudius returned, the whispers were already at his ear, the rumors too loud to ignore. The Senate, once terrified of Messalina, now smelled blood. They saw her boldness not as seduction, but as treason. Even Narcissus, the emperor's closest freedman, loyal and cunning, could not protect her anymore. The evidence was too loud. A secret marriage, a plan to make Celius emperor public mockery of her husband. Even Messalina's beauty couldn't rescue her now. Rome had reached its limit. And now so had the emperor. You hear it now, the sound of boots. Rough, heavy, marching through corridors not with lust, but law. Soldiers. Messalina didn't beg. That's what surprised them. When she was dragged from her villa, she didn't scream, didn't curse. She stood silent, hair disheveled, feet bare, eyes empty. Some say she tried to reach Claudius, tried to beg for mercy at the last moment. Others say she simply laughed, knowing he wouldn't look her in the eyes. They brought her to the gardens of Lucullus, a place of silence, of endings. You are there now. The grass grows long. The statues lean with age, but the shadows haven't changed. She was handed a dagger, expected to take her own life, to spare the emperor the shame of killing his wife. She looked at it, then set it down, not out of cowardice, but defiance. She would not give Rome that ending. She would not give them the performance they wanted. So the soldier stepped forward, and when the blade pierced her chest, she looked up at the sky and whispered one word, his name. Gaius. He was executed shortly after. Their story ended not in a blaze, but in a sigh. You sit now among the trees, hearing the breeze whisper through the branches. She was gone. But the palace still remembers. Because power once tasted doesn't vanish. It lingers, infects the walls, stains the bedclothes, echoes in the footsteps of those who come after. And long after her name was scraped from monuments and erased from scrolls, people still spoke of her, not with hatred, but with fear and fascination. Because Messalina was not just an empress. She was a question, a warning, and for some, a fantasy that never died. You remain in the garden where her blood once soaked into the roots. The wind brushes your skin like the trailing edge of a silk robe. You can almost hear her laughter. Not cruel, not joyful, just resigned. As if she knew this would happen all along. Because Rome always turns on its queens, the marble statues around you lean forward ever so slightly, as if still listening for her return. They're not just ornaments, they're witnesses. Every vine that winds its way up the stone feels like a hand reaching from the past, grasping, wanting to tell you what they saw. And what they saw wasn't just lust, it was survival. Messalina didn't begin as a villain. She began as a girl in a cage, betrothed before puberty, trained in silence and obedience, taught to walk a step behind, to speak only when prompted to smile and never speak of pain. The palace turned her into a predator because the palace devoured the weak. She learned early that beauty was a weapon sharper than steel, that her body could buy silence, favors, and escape. So she wielded it like a general wields a sword. The empire didn't know what to do with a woman who didn't feel shame, so they called her mad. They painted her as nymphomaniac, depraved, demonic, but they never admitted the truth. She was a mirror, And what terrified Rome was what she reflected. You walk back inside. The corridors feel colder now, empty. Not just of people, but of fear. She's gone, and yet the tension doesn't lift. Because something remains. Something in the architecture. You enter what used to be her dressing chamber, a place of transformation. Silk gowns, trays of perfume pins, carved of ivory and bone. But beneath the vanity drawers you find compartments, hidden, cleverly built, inside letters. Some are sealed, some open, all written by the men who once belonged to her. But these aren't love notes. They're pleas. One reads, "Domina, I have done as you asked. My wife suspects. My servants whisper. I have mortgaged my estate. I live only for your summons. Tell me, when shall I next be used?" Another, "You made me watch. I did not look away. I have not slept since. Please, tell me what I am now. I no longer know." She never responded to these letters. That was the point. The pain wasn't in the moment, it was in the aftermath. She knew the emptiness she left was more powerful than her presence. You move deeper. There's one room the palace still tries to hide. A back chamber, the door covered with a tapestry of Persephone descending into Hades. Her eyes closed, her mouth almost smiling. The door opens without a sound. Inside is nothing. No furniture, no candles, no scent. Just a circular floor, smooth and bare like a stage or an altar. This was where she stood when she needed silence, not solitude. She hated being alone. But silence that was sacred. In this room, she would strip down, no jewelry, no makeup, no guards, and simply listen. To the walls, to her memories, to the names she had broken. Some say she came here after every conquest, after every night in the nursery or the garden or the mirror chamber. She would stand barefoot in the center and whisper the names of those she'd conquered, like a prayer. Some believe this was her true religion. Not the gods, not the rites, but the ritual of remembering. Because what is power if no one recalls your name? You take one last look around and notice a small mark carved into the floor, almost invisible, a single word in Latin venia, mercy. It doesn't make sense. Not here. Not in her place of power. Unless it wasn't for others. It was for her. You step back, and suddenly you feel her, not beside you, but behind your eyes. She is not gone. She is not buried. She is inside the walls, inside the history, inside every whisper of Rome's cruelty and elegance. Because the truth about Messalina was never in the scandal. It was in the reaction. She did what emperors did, but with different tools. She humiliated men not on the battlefield, but in bed. She conquered not lands, but hearts. And that was unforgivable. So they erased her, demonized her, made her a footnote in the shadow of Claudius. But not completely. Not here. In these corridors she still rules, because even death could not undo what she had built. A legend, a ghost, a hunger in silk. And as you turn to leave the chamber, you notice one final thing etched into the doorframe as you exit. 3 words barely visible beneath the dust. She chose everything. Not a victim, not a pawn, a player. And Rome couldn't stand it. You climb back toward the light now, away from the underground chambers, past the wilted tapestries and broken frescoes. But the air hasn't changed. It's still thick with her perfume, even though no bottle remains. The smell isn't real, and yet it clings to your thoughts like oil. A phantom fragrance. A memory you never lived. She's still with you. Because Messalina didn't rule only through touch or sight or voice. She ruled through anticipation. Through that quiet question that bloomed in every heart she ever touched. What will she ask of me next? You enter the Hall of Invitations. That's what it was called. A grand corridor lined with golden scroll racks, ornate inkwells, and red wax seals shaped like her personal sigil, a serpent coiled through a laurel wreath. Each scroll was handwritten, each one addressed to a man or woman of high status. And each carried the same delicate phrase, "Your presence is requested for an evening of remembrance." Remembrance of what no one knew until they arrived. And by then, it was too late. There's a marble table at the center of the hall. Upon it, dozens of scrolls remain unopened. You pick one up, untie the ribbon. It is not written in commands. It is written like a dream. You are not what you pretend to be. I see the cracks in your armor, the shame behind your silks. Come, let me show you what the mirror hides. She didn't threaten. She understood. That was her power. Because the greatest weapon in Rome was not poison, nor sword, nor decree. It was intimacy. You walk along the scroll racks, running your fingers across the names etched in ivory tags. Governors, generals, priests, even 2 consuls. She invited everyone, and no one refused. They couldn't, because by then they were already under her spell. She saw something in each of them that they spent their lives trying to bury. A fantasy, a hunger, a need to be exposed. She made it feel like liberation, but it always came with a cost. Her favorite game, the one she played when Rome's moon was at its fullest, she called it the reversal. You find a carved panel nearby depicting it, a wooden triptych hidden in the wall recently unearthed. You slide it open. Left panel, a nobleman on a throne surrounded by servants. Center panel. The same nobleman now chained, head bowed, surrounded by masked dancers. Right panel, the nobleman kneeling before Messalina, who sits in his throne holding his scepter like a toy. She turned the powerful into pets, but never all at once. She was patient, precise. She didn't want to break the empire. She wanted to remind it who it truly served. And it wasn't the gods. It was desire. You step into the atrium now. The dome above is cracked, but sunlight pierces through, catching on golden mosaics of Venus and Mars entangled in myth. This is where her most elite guests arrived, pretending it was a dinner, or a ritual, or a philosophical debate. It was none of those. It was surrender. A bowl once sat at the atrium entrance, now long gone, but records speak of it. Polished obsidian filled with black ink. Each guest upon entering would dip their index finger and mark a single line across their lips, to seal their silence. Not a vow, an admission that they were about to betray their public selves, and that Messalina was the only one who knew their real selves. You imagine it now, an elderly senator trembling as he dips his finger. A young military tribune trying to mask his eagerness. A priest of Jupiter hesitating at the door, then pressing forward anyway. Each of them walking deeper into her domain. And each of them by night's end begging to be seen again. But she rarely allowed repeats. She preferred the hunger of one-time devastation. She wanted her guests to spend the rest of their lives wondering, was it real? Did I dream it? Will she summon me again? They never knew. And that uncertainty gave her more control than any legion could. You walk through the atrium and find a collapsed doorway. Behind it, barely intact, lies what remains of the scriptorium obscura, the dark writing room. This is where her scribes, mostly mute, mostly foreign, sworn to secrecy, copied down what she witnessed. Each guest's secret, each confession, each scream. It wasn't just a memory palace. It was a black archive, a map of Rome's sins. Had she wanted, she could have collapsed the empire with a single reading. Instead, she held it in her hands. Because what is power if not the ability to ruin and choosing not to? You step past broken scroll cases, charred remains of names once burned by order of Claudius himself. But a few survive. You read a snippet Governor P. Wungshe Chrome requested to be washed like an infant, cried when denied, offered his province for another night. Praetor Q. Mo confessed to watching his own brother in the stables, gave Messalina a stallion as tribute. The room creaks. You step back. You realize that no matter how many of these scrolls you read, they all lead to the same truth. Messalina wasn't collecting secrets for blackmail. She was building scripture, her own religion, where shame was sacred, where lust was law, and where the altar was her bed. You leave the scriptorium obscura and walk slowly through what remains of the east wing. The floor is uneven, strewn with crumbling tiles and the scattered bones of forgotten things, animal or human. It's no longer clear. The torches here are unlit, but you don't need fire to see. You're starting to see everything now. The architecture of her madness, the geometry of her pleasure, the elegance of her cruelty. And just ahead, another chamber. This one feels different. There are no mirrors, no silks, no incense. Only a quiet, flickering light from a small oil lamp hung from a nail in the ceiling. You step inside and realize you're standing in what scholars call the room of unmasking. Here the masks came off. Not the leather and bronze disguises she handed out during her private rituals. Those were merely the first layer. What came off in this room was identity itself. This is where Messalina brought her guests after they'd been broken. After they'd confessed, cried, begged, and trembled. This was where she asked the final question, who are you when no one is watching? And it wasn't rhetorical. She demanded an answer. Sometimes it came in sobs, sometimes in silence, sometimes in whispers so faint they barely moved the air. She listened. Then she would nod. Sometimes she would kiss them on the forehead. Sometimes she would turn away without a word. And occasionally she would laugh softly, as if they'd told her a joke they didn't know was funny. There are stains on the floor here, circular as if from knees pressed into stone for hours, etched along the wall in delicate cursive dozens of names, some crossed out, some left untouched. You realize it wasn't about destruction. It was about transformation. Messalina didn't want to ruin her guests. She wanted to reveal them. Not their titles, not their reputations, but the private, shivering creature beneath all that. And once she saw that creature, she decided what to do next. She once told a Roman playwright, "You write stories with ink. I write them with skin." He laughed at the time. 2 months later, he was found naked in a grove outside the city. He's painted black with ash, singing to a bird that wasn't there. He lived for 5 more years. He never wrote again. You step past the room of unmasking and follow a hallway draped with aged velvet. The curtains hang heavy with dust, their once rich reds now a sickly gray. On the other side is the most forbidden chamber in the entire palace. So forbidden, it wasn't spoken of, not even in rumors. They called it the Chamber of Echoes. You push the door. It doesn't open like a door. It breathes. And inside is nothing. No walls, no windows. Just darkness and acoustics so precise that every footstep returns to you like a memory. You move once and the sound doesn't echo. It responds. It wraps around you like arms. This was where Messalina listened not to others, but to herself. Not her voice, her impact. She would stand in the center of the chamber and say a name, and the chamber would repeat it, distorted, softened, drawn out like a prayer. You try it now. You say her name, just once, quietly. Messalina. The chamber doesn't echo it. It exhales it. As if it knew you were coming, as if it welcomed you. They say she came here in her final weeks after her secret wedding, when the palace walls had started to betray her. When Narcissus had begun collecting testimonies. When even her slaves shifted their eyes and no longer bowed as quickly. She came here because this was the only place that would not lie to her. This chamber gave her back her true voice. And it was here, it is said, that she composed her final ritual, one that was never completed, a new kind of performance. Not based on shame, but on love, a love that destroyed her. You find a tablet near the far wall, cracked but legible. On it, the first lines of a play. He is not like the others. He does not beg. He does not kneel, he sees me. Am I still a goddess if I am seen? You don't know if she ever finished it. You don't think she had time. Because even the greatest empress cannot write a second act once Rome decides she's no longer interesting. The darkness closes around you as you step out of the chamber. Not like an ending, more like a pause. Because every piece of her story is circular, woven like a crown of thorns and roses, pain and beauty wrapped together so tightly that to admire one is to bleed from the other. Messalina's power wasn't in how many men she seduced. It was in how many versions of herself she created. Each man, each night, each ritual she became someone else. Lover, priestess, executioner, oracle, mirror. And none of those versions were fake. They were all her. Rome wanted to simplify her, to call her evil, to brand her mad, to reduce her to a scandal. But when you walk these halls, when you breathe this dust, you realize how impossible that is. She wasn't a single story. She was all of them, and the ones yet to come. You return to the upper halls, the ones the public knew. Marble, light, elegance. But now you understand how deceptive they were. This was the part of the palace where Rome pretended to be divine, where columns soared into sunlit domes, where white-robed senators strolled and poets read verses about virtue and order. And yet beneath this floor, just one level below, there were masks, blood, trembling voices, and whispered names in the dark. The contrast wasn't accidental. Messalina designed it this way. You walk slowly through the Hall of Triumphs. The mosaics here depict traditional Roman victories, Claudius accepting tribute from Britannia generals, standing over piles of foreign weapons, temple priests blessing the empire's greatness. But if you look closer than most ever dared, you start to notice something. There are faces in the margins. Women fauve concealed behind temple columns. Shadowy eyes watching from windows. Subtle gestures, a hand cupping a man's chin, a foot atop a kneeling figure. Messalina is there in fragments in corners in all the places Rome didn't want to admit she had been. Because Rome feared her presence more than her body, her memory more than her pleasure, and her ideas more than her touch. You stop beneath one mosaic that is mostly faded now. Only a few tiles remain clear. They form the shape of a serpent curling around a laurel, her private sigil, hidden here in plain sight. This wasn't just the palace of an empress. It was a puzzle box of power. Everything she touched had two meanings. A kiss could be seduction or warning. A whisper could be a confession or a curse. A gift could be love or a leash. And sometimes she gave all three at once. You walk past the columns and through a narrow corridor that opens into a small antechamber, a room few entered, the place where she received her special guests. This was no throne room. There was no gold, no soldiers, no grand audience. Just a round, shallow pool, steam still rising from its stone rim. This was the bath of unburdening. It was not used for cleansing the body. It was for shedding identity. Messalina believed water was a threshold. When submerged, you were no longer senator, soldier, citizen. You were whatever she made you. Guests were stripped silently by blindfolded slaves, led into the warm water, then left alone until she entered. She never arrived the same way, sometimes cloaked, sometimes nude, sometimes in nothing but a veil and dagger. And she never spoke first. The rule was clear: you speak or you drown. One guest, a former consul, panicked, couldn't bring himself to say anything, tried to leave the bath. He never reached the edge. He slipped beneath the surface, and when the slaves retrieved his body hours later, his face was twisted into something that wasn't fear. It was longing. This was Messalina's genius. She made destruction feel like transcendence. You sit now on the edge of the bath, the stone warm from centuries of heat. The water is still, the surface so reflective it's like another sky. And for a moment you see her face, not the painted one on coins, not the sculpted version that came later, colder, more regal. No, this is a face with no crown, no robe. A young woman, bare-shouldered, eyes half-lidded, lips parted not in seduction, but in thought. She sees you. And then the image fades. Because Messalina never stayed in one place for long, not even in memory. You stand and walk through the archway that leads to her private study. It is remarkably plain. Wooden shelves, low lamps, no gold, no statues. But this was where she made decisions. Not orders to armies or decrees to citizens. No. Here she decided who would be invited. The names on the scrolls didn't come from chance. She studied Rome, knew every weak joint in its armor, the devout senator whose wife was barren, the ambitious tribune who feared his own cravings, the poet whose verses were a mask for shame. She found them, and offered them not pleasure, but relief. She told them the thing no one else ever dared: it's not your fault. And they believed her. Because sometimes the most perverse thing isn't what someone does to your body. It's what they make you feel with your soul. In the corner of her study sits a low bench carved with names. All male, No titles, just the intimate forms. Lucius, Marcellus, Faustus, Gaius. Notched into the wood are tiny lines beside each one. Tally marks. She was counting. Not the number of lovers, but the number of people she changed. There's a final name at the bottom, half scratched out. The marks beside it go on for nearly a foot. You can't read the name, but you already know who it is. Because the one person she changed the most was herself, and she never stopped counting. There's one last stairwell, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, some eager, some hesitant, some dragged. You descend into the vault of night. That's what her closest attendants called it. They never described what went on here. Not because they couldn't, but because they weren't sure it was real. This wasn't a space meant for the body. It was designed for the mind. The stone turns black here, not painted, not burned. It was quarried that way. A deep obsidian-like basalt. Absorbs light, swallows sound. And the air feels wrong, heavier, thicker, like something pressing against your ribs. Messalina rarely brought more than one guest into this place at a time, and never for pleasure. This was where she reconstructed people. You pass under an arch that bears no carvings, just a single inscription etched with a dagger, Ego sum veritas tua. I am your truth. Inside there is no furniture. Only objects arranged around the circular walls. Each one symbolic. Each one used. You see a white mask shaped like a lamb. A child's sandal. A rusted Roman coin embedded in wax. A goblet filled with dried poppy resin. A shard of mirror with a smear of rouge still clinging to its surface. This wasn't decoration. This was ritual. Her rituals weren't religious. They didn't call down the gods. They called down the self, a process of removal. She would have her guest kneel in the center of the circle and begin asking questions, soft at first, then sharper, until they broke. But here's what made her terrifying. She never asked why. She only asked how much. How much would you sacrifice to be cleansed? How much of yourself would you leave behind to feel weightless again? No lies, no justifications, no forgiveness. Only excavation. Some said she could see into souls. That once she spoke your name, she saw every act you hoped no one ever knew. Others claimed she fed on guilt like wine, that it made her glow. But maybe the truth is simpler. She was a woman taught by a system to kneel and chose instead to make others kneel. A priest once accused her of heresy, of defiling sacred rites. He called her a rotted Venus. The next week he arrived at her palace in silence. He kissed her feet, wept, and begged to be taken to the vault. He left 3 days later with no tongue, not cut, just bitten off by himself. He never spoke again. You wonder what she whispered. This was her confessional, but not one of mercy, one of mirrors. She would place her guests before a polished slab and strip them of clothing, jewelry, and words. Then she'd say, "You came here thinking I would touch you, but I already have. In your mind, in your dreams, in that part of you that hoped no one would ever look too closely. I have always been watching. Now watch yourself." And she would leave them there, hours, sometimes days, until they broke. One man, a Stoic philosopher, proud of his resistance to carnal pleasure, left the vault wearing nothing but ashes. He walked barefoot to the Temple of Mars and threw himself down the steps, not out of shame, but out of release. Messalina was the first person to make him feel, even if what he felt was agony. You take a slow breath and move to the far side of the room. Here, carved deep into the wall, are drawings. Rough, not artistic, childlike, but deliberate. Figures kneeling, others floating, some melting into the ground. One has its chest opened like a door. Inside, a smaller version of itself curled and shaking. You realize these weren't decorations. They were confessions, made not with words but with marks. Scratches made by broken fingernails and trembling hands. Messalina didn't need scrolls to remember. She made her visitors leave a piece of themselves here. Some say that if you kneel in the vault, close your eyes, and stay completely silent, you'll hear them. The prayers, the screams, the promises. You try it, just for a moment. You kneel, close your eyes, wait, and then a breath. Not your own, a whisper, not words, a presence. You open your eyes, and she is not there. But you feel her behind you, not watching, waiting, because you came here, didn't you? You chose this, and that was always her greatest seduction, the illusion that it was your idea, that she didn't force you, didn't push, didn't twist your arm. She simply opened the door, and you walked in, willingly, because in the darkest part of you, the part no temple can cleanse, you wanted to be seen. And Messalina. She saw everything. You emerge from the vault of night with a chill that has nothing to do with temperature. Your legs feel slower, heavier, as if they're resisting the path ahead. But you continue drawn by something deeper than curiosity now. It's recognition. Because whether you like it or not, you've been marked. Like the others. Just by knowing. You step into the Hall of Remnants. It's quiet here. Dignified. Not like the hedonistic chambers or the confession vaults or the mirrored dens of surrender. This place feels almost sacred. And maybe for her it was. The walls are lined with relics, some placed in niches, others sealed in glass. Each one is accompanied by a brief inscription carved into the stone beneath it. But not descriptions. Questions. A torn sandal, what would you leave behind to walk freely? A faded silk collar, what did you wear to feel owned? A snapped writing stylus. When did you stop pretending to be in control? This was her museum of aftermath. She didn't display victories here. She displayed transformation. And she didn't name names, only the moment when a person changed. You step slowly, scanning the items. A man's ring with the gem missing. A crushed flute. A shredded piece of parchment with only the word, again, legible in ink. These weren't symbols of conquest. They were souvenirs of surrender. She kept them not as trophies, but as proof. Proof that even the mighty could shatter. And that breaking someone was never the end. It was the beginning. Messalina once said to a guest, according to the slave who overheard it from behind a curtain, "You think I want to ruin you, no, my darling. I want to help you let go of the lie you've been living. I want to give you permission to be what you already are." You pass a faded mural near the far wall. It's not like the others. No gods, no myths, no Roman virtue. Just a woman naked, seated on a marble bench. Her eyes are closed, her lips parted, and behind her dozens of shadows, all with hands outstretched not to touch her, but to offer themselves. It's signed only with a small carving in the corner, a serpent and a laurel. She didn't need recognition. She had control, and those who entered her world were never the same. You leave the Hall of Remnants and walk toward what was once her private atrium, a space only she and her most trusted attendants were allowed to enter. Not even Claudius set foot here. He wasn't invited. At the center is a circular bench surrounded by low trees that were once perfumed with night jasmine. The petals are gone now, but their scent seems embedded in the stone. And beneath the bench, carved into the floor, are two words, "Mi miseram," wretched me. Scholars argue whether she carved that herself or if one of her guests did, but maybe it doesn't matter, because this was the one place she could feel, the place where she didn't need masks or performances or pain, the place where the weight of her own creation could settle onto her shoulders, because even monsters need to breathe. And Messalina wasn't a monster. She was a mirror, and mirrors crack when you stare too long. You look up. In the tree branches overhead, small wind chimes hang, some made of bone, others of glass, others of stone. Each one carries a faint note when the breeze passes. They don't make music. They make memory. It's said she had them installed after a night where 5 of her guests wept in unison. She claimed she'd never heard a more beautiful sound, so she captured it in fragments and made it eternal. This was her garden of sorrow, not the kind people flee, the kind they return to, because sorrow to Messalina wasn't a punishment, it was a truth, and truth was the most intoxicating thing of all. You turn to leave the atrium and find a final passage. This one bears no name, no carvings, just an opening in the stone with walls smooth from use. Only one servant in Roman history ever described what was at the end of that corridor. She didn't speak of chains or silk. She spoke of a cradle, made of marble and velvet, nestled in a room with no light, surrounded by carvings of stars and moon phases. She said Messalina would lie in it at night naked, wrapped in silence, rocking herself, not to sleep, but to remember, to become small again, to become her again, before the palace, before the masks, before the games and mirrors and scrolls. Just Valeria, just a girl. And sometimes she would whisper one word into the darkness. The servant never heard what it was, but she said when Messalina whispered it, the wind would stop moving, as if Rome itself was listening. The corridor narrows behind you, as if the palace doesn't want to let you go. You step into a new chamber, not part of any architectural plan. The ceiling is too low, the proportions wrong. This place feels carved by instinct, not design. It's called the Whispering Vault, though no official records name it that. The term comes from a letter half-burned written by a Roman slave to her sister. She brings them there one by one. I've never seen what happens, but I've heard the echoes, not screams, whispers, always whispers, like prayers or curses. They never come out the same. You understand what she meant now. This room is lined with fabric, not silk, not velvet, but something heavier, woven tightly stitched with golden thread in looping endless spirals. You touch it and feel warmth. The fabric has absorbed something. Time, voices, shame. You listen. It takes a moment to realize the sound you're hearing isn't imagined. It's real. A soft hum, a low murmur, layered, ancient. Hundreds of voices speaking at once but never louder than a breath. If you concentrate, you catch fragments. Please don't stop. She saw everything. I gave her everything. Everything. I wasn't supposed to like it. It's not noise. It's remnants. This room isn't haunted. It's inhabited by memory, by emotion, by echoes left behind by those who could never quite leave. Messalina created this room for a purpose, not to punish, to preserve, because she knew the world would try to erase her, that her name would be written in ash and her body buried under gossip and fire. But emotion that cannot be silenced, so she collected it. Not on scrolls, but in walls. Each visitor after their ritual, their humiliation, their transformation was brought here. Not to be touched, but to speak alone, surrounded by the very fabric of others like them. They were told, speak only what you cannot say aloud anywhere else. And they did. Not out of fear, out of need. You can feel their need now. It seeps through the air like humidity, thick, unrelenting, lingering. A senator's final confession, a soldier's secret desire, a priest's worst thought, all woven into the very threads around you. And then you notice something else. A single stretch of fabric torn and patched with crude stitches. On it, a short phrase burned into the material, not sewn, but scorched. I didn't know I could be loved like that. Was it a mockery, a confession, or worse, gratitude? Because that was Messalina's final magic trick. She made shame feel like intimacy. She made humiliation feel like acceptance. She made ruin feel like revelation. Not everyone hated her for it. Some worshipped her, and a few never left. You move to the far wall where a narrow table stands. Laid out upon it are fragments of faces. Masks, yes, but not hers. These are casts of her guests, made after their visits, molded while they wept or trembled, each one with a different expression, not agony, not ecstasy, but that strange in-between, that place where pain becomes pleasure and truth becomes unbearable. You reach toward one. The plaster is cool. On its inner rim, barely scratched, you read the words, "You showed me who I am." There is no name. Of course not. There never was. Names were for the outside world. Here everyone became anonymous except to her. Because Messalina didn't believe in identities. She believed in essence. The core beneath all masks. The creature underneath the polished speech and embroidered robes. And once she saw your essence, she never forgot it. You exit the chamber, and the murmur fades behind you. But it lingers in your chest, like a heartbeat that isn't yours. And now you enter a hallway lit with soft amber lanterns, each flame protected by glass blown into the shapes of petals. This was the passage of regret, built not for the guests, but for her. She would walk this path after each ritual, barefoot, silent, one hand trailing the walls as if asking them for forgiveness, or perhaps offering her own. No one was allowed here while she walked. It was her time of reckoning. The slave said her eyes changed on this walk, not distant, not cold, but exhausted. And maybe that was the truth at the core of it all. Messalina wasn't an eternal goddess. She wasn't a flame that burned without consequence. She was tired of pretending, tired of resisting, tired of being only what Rome wanted her to be. So she made her palace not just a place of games, but of honesty. the kind of honesty most people can't survive. You reach the end of the passage. One final door. No lock, no handle, just a single line engraved into the stone. Here we leave the world behind. And on the other side, the final part of her story waits. Not the scandal, not the execution, but the secret. The one she never told anyone. The one only the walls remember. You press your hand against the door. It opens inward without resistance, quietly, slowly, like a sigh. Beyond it lies her most private sanctuary. Not gilded, not perfumed, not guarded. Just a room carved into pure stone, circular, like a womb lit by a skylight that filters in a soft beam of natural light. It's dusty now, neglected, but the silence inside feels sacred. This was the sanctum of one. It had only one rule: no one entered but her. Even her most trusted servants were forbidden. It said she would disappear here for hours, sometimes days. No meals, no conversation, no performances. And when she returned, she was always changed. No one knew what she did in here, but some claimed she emerged with tears still drying on her cheeks. Others swore they saw her smiling softly, quietly, like a child waking from a dream. The truth was simpler. This was where she came to remember who she used to be. Not empress, not seductress, not Rome's most whispered name. Just Valeria, the daughter, the girl, the one who was told to stand straight, to never speak before being spoken to smile even when afraid. The one who had dreams of books and oceans, not chambers of ritual and scrolls soaked in lust. This room holds none of her masks. Instead, it holds objects of stillness. A comb, a dried lavender bundle, a cracked pottery dish with faded blue glaze, a necklace of polished glass beads, cheap, childlike, the kind worn by a girl long before the crown ever touched her head. You kneel beside it, and suddenly the palace quiets, not with fear, but with permission, because even the worst monsters need a place to put down their claws. Even she who tore down reputations with whispers and seduced senators like songs needed somewhere to stop performing. And here she wasn't a goddess. She was tired. There's a shallow basin at the center of the room, filled not with water now, but dust. Still you see etchings along the rim, a phrase written not in Latin, but Greek, soft, poetic. Know thyself, and forget no part. Even in stillness, she demanded total honesty. Not just about your hunger, your shame, your dreams, but your wounds, your origin, your softness. You run your fingers through the dust inside the basin and feel something solid. You pull it free. It's a small wooden carving, rough, imperfect. It's her. But not as a queen, not even as a woman. It's a child's rendering, stick-like, with round cheeks and a smile that's almost too wide. She carved it herself and then buried it, because even Messalina needed a witness to the version of her that Rome would never understand. You place it back gently, brushing the dust over it again. Not to hide it, but to protect it. You rise and look around the chamber one last time. This was the only place in the entire palace where no acts were performed, no games played, no names spoken, just breathing, just memory, just the raw, aching truth that beneath all the cruelty, all the ceremony and silk, there had once been someone kind. and the world had burned that part out of her. You step back toward the exit, and the light from above flickers as a cloud passes. For a moment, the room dims, and then a soft beam lands across a section of the wall. You hadn't noticed it before. A carving, shallow, faint, barely legible, but real. I gave them what they wanted. Then I gave them what they feared. And finally, I gave them myself, and they killed me for all three. You don't breathe, not for a moment. Because that was the truth no scroll ever recorded. Not the senators, not Tacitus, not even the slave girls who whispered her stories by firelight. She wasn't punished because she broke the law. She was punished because she understood them, because she held up a mirror and made them stare. You step through the doorway back into the dim passage. The air is heavier now. Final. Only 2 chambers remain. The first, they say, is where she kept her last scroll, the one that was never opened. The one that Claudius's guards found, but never read aloud. They burned it. Too dangerous. But a slave who peeked at its final line before the flames took it said it read, "He loved me." He just didn't know what to do with that. And the second chamber, no one knows what was inside. Because after her death, the doors were sealed shut. But they say if you press your ear to the wall, you can still hear her, laughing, not mockingly, but softly, as if she's watching you now, and wondering how much of you would I have unmasked. You stand before the sealed chamber now. There's no handle, no inscription, no echo. Just smooth, cold stone undisturbed for centuries. The dust around its base is undisturbed, the silence behind it absolute. This is where it ends. Not just her story, but yours. Because you haven't just been walking through Messalina's palace. You've been walking through the dark hallways of power and pleasure and shame and need and the terrible, beautiful desire to be known. You press your hand to the stone. It doesn't give. Of course not. This room was never meant to be opened again. It wasn't built for the world to see. It was built to contain something. Her final version. The part she didn't let even herself see while she was alive. Some say the room was filled with water, an underground pool with no reflection. A place where she would float in total silence, weightless, blind, unanchored. A sensory womb. No walls, no floor, no voice. Just her and the emptiness. Others say it was a chamber filled with letters. Letters she wrote to the men she broke. To the women who envied her. To the children she never bore. To the self she never allowed to grow old. But most believe it was empty, and that's why it was terrifying. Because the final version of Messalina wasn't an empress, a seductress, a monster, or a martyr. It was nothing. A void where she could finally stop being everything to everyone. The ultimate indulgence, silence. And not just soundless silence, a silence of existence. You turn away from the sealed chamber and find yourself walking once more barefoot through the long marble corridors of a palace that feels colder now. Her scent is gone. Her breath is gone. Only memory remains. But memory is stronger than bone. You enter the final gallery. Here the empire pretended to honor her. A half-hearted attempt at legacy, cobbled together by the men who survived her, who feared her, who whispered about her name over wine and behind closed doors. There is a bust here, cracked, face smooth and featureless. They erased her eyes. They didn't want the statue to look at them. And beside it, a plaque that reads, "Only Valeria Messalina, third wife of Claudius, executed for treason." That's all. No mention of the whispers, no mention of the lists, no mention of the lovers who never recovered, no mention of the nights that Rome burned with want, guilt, obsession, and ruin, and called it worship. Just a name, a title, a death. But the walls know more, and now so do you. You walk slowly through the rest of the gallery. There are statues of the others who came after her. Agrippina, Poppaea, Julia, Domitia. Each one more careful, each one more silent. Because they learned from Messalina what happens when a woman refuses to bow, when she uses the tools of men domination, seduction, strategy, and does it better. Rome didn't fear her madness. Rome feared her clarity, and it killed her for it. But something strange happened after her death. Not immediately, not publicly, but gradually. Poets started writing of unnamed women who ruled with softness and fire. Artists painted veiled figures with snake-shaped bracelets and eyes that stared through the viewer. Even priests began preaching sermons about the danger of desire, but they never quite said whose. She haunted the culture not like a ghost, but like a scent. Subtle, inescapable. She became what she always wanted to be. Unforgettable. You leave the gallery and step into the last hallway, now open to the air. The wind brushes your face. It smells of cypress and something else, maybe lilac, maybe ash. The sky is grayer than before, or perhaps your eyes have changed. Before you is a threshold, an arch framed in ivy. On the arch is the last inscription left behind. And who knew her? "You saw me as I was, and that is why I had to go. You step through, not because you're ready, but because that's what Messalina always asked. Will you come with me anyway?" And they always did. Because to know her was to abandon logic, to abandon control, to be undone. And what's more Roman than that, the sunlight on your skin now feels like waking from a long, strange dream. But the palace behind you still looms not in stone but in memory. Because it never really ends, does it? Messalina wasn't just a woman. She was a ritual. A riddle whispered from lip to lip, never written down, only passed along in gasps and glances. And you've heard it now, felt it, lived it. You move beyond the garden walls, where wildflowers grow in careless rebellion, where broken statues sink into the dirt like forgotten gods. There's no plaque here, no monument to her legacy, just silence and vines and sky. But her fingerprints are everywhere, in the way the air still hums, in the way your chest still tightens, in the fact that you keep looking over your shoulder, expecting to see her watching, not judging, just knowing. Because that was her final gift. She never needed to be remembered in marble or verse. She only needed to be felt. And in that she succeeded. You find a stone bench overlooking the city. Rome lies before you now, wide and golden, its rooftops stretching in every direction, the great dome of Jupiter's temple rising in the distance. From here it looks peaceful, innocent almost. But you know better. Because every brick down there, every Senate chamber, every villa, every bathhouse has its own secrets, its own shadows. Messalina just refused to pretend. She lived as if shame were a myth. She touched what others dared not admit they even wanted. And she paid for it. Not with wealth, not with exile, but with erasure. The worst punishment Rome could invent for a woman who made herself unforgettable. You sit with that thought for a moment, and you realize the most terrifying thing isn't what she did to others. It's what she understood about them. Because her chambers weren't built to inflict pain. They were built to listen, to reflect, to reveal. That was her true perversion, not the games or the chains or the mirrors. It was her unrelenting, terrifying clarity. She looked into you, and she didn't look away. And neither can you now. You rise from the bench. The city stretches out in front of you. Familiar streets, ancient stones, the illusion of order built on centuries of control. But beneath it all, in the cracks and shadows and rumors, she still lives. Not as a ghost, as a possibility. The possibility that someone could name the hunger in others before they name it themselves. That someone could make the powerful beg without ever raising their voice. That someone could love you for who you are and still destroy you with a smile. Messalina didn't die in the garden. She transformed. She became the whisper in every corridor, the sigh behind every confession, the part of you that wonders if your worst secret might also be your truest self. She became the answer to a question you didn't know you'd been asking. What would I become if no one could stop me? And now, the palace is behind you. The sky darkens, and her story, twisted, tender, terrifying, has wrapped itself around your ribs like silk. You carry her now, like they all did. Take a slow breath. It's over now. You've walked the halls of one of history's most forbidden figures. You've seen the masks, the rituals, the candles flickering on stone altars, and the eyes that never looked away. You've stepped through velvet and bone and silence, and through it all, one truth has followed you. She was not a myth. She was not madness. She was a mirror. And in that reflection, you saw things you didn't expect. Desire, control, the ache to be seen. Messalina may be gone, but her palace isn't made of stone, it's made of memory, and memory never dies. It waits, gently, patiently, until someone brave enough asks the forbidden question, what really happened? You did that tonight, and you survived. Now, let your muscles soften. Let your thoughts drift. Let the tension of Messalina's story settle like dust over marble. There is no more need to look behind you. She's gone. The torches have burned out. The silk has fallen. The last scroll has closed. The whispers have become a hum, and that hum is fading. Breathe in, feel the weight leave your chest. Breathe out. Let go of her name. Let go of the palace. Let go of the mirror. There's nothing left to fear. Only sleep. Only silence. Only the soft hush of night closing its hands gently around you. You are safe now. You are still. And you are free.